In my Prodigy video, you guys liked it over 5,000 times in 24 hours. So delivering on that promise, we have 3 guns squaring off for your viewing pleasure. The Staccato P, the Bul Armory Tac Commander, and the Springfield Armory Prodigy. Are you ready? Stand by. Welcome back to the Humble Marksman channel, the only gun channel here on YouTube with BDE. That's right, Big Dad Energy.
Dad, hey dad, hey dad, dad, hey dad, hey dad, hey dad. I need to hear this.
So anyway, let's talk about these 3 guns, but more importantly, the prize. If you like this video, that's right, you're watching it, if you're getting value from it, just hit the like button. I will do a video comparing what it's like to shoot a 5-inch version of a gun, in this case the Springfield Armory Prodigy 5-inch versus the 4¼ version of this gun. That's the same predicament you face in the Bul Armory lineup with their 5 versus their commander length gun, and similarly the Staccato P to the Staccato C2. So 5,000 likes in 24 hours and I'll make that video. Couple ground rules setting the table. Number 1, in the year 2022, you're not allowed to like anything on the internet, especially if you have a YouTube channel, without getting called a shill. So at some point, because I'll say nice things about all 3 of these guns, you can say I'm shilling for all 3 of these guns. That's a really professional commenter move, so like, hey man, that gets you cred on the forums because you know better. Number 2, metal injection molding is what MIM stands for, and you'll hear me say MIM a few times in this gun. It's a process where you take like molten metal and compress it into a mold to create gun parts, versus a tooled steel part, which is taking a blank of a part that's roughly the shape it needs to be and machining it to be its final shape and spec. There's a good bit of FUD lore that's been circulating the internet board since these were, Microsoft Prodigy and AOL message boards. Putting MIM parts into pistols isn't going to cause your mother's car to veer off into a ditch. Most of the popular pistols that are used in service right now have MIM parts in them. They don't magically become worse somehow if you put them in a hammer-fired gun. That said, they are not as robust, they do not have as long a service life, and they cannot hold the more aggressive geometry that is required for really nice trigger jobs. MIM is not quite as nice as tooled steel, but it's also not as bad as everybody makes it sound as well. I mean, last time you were at the range, did you notice a pile of MIM parts broken on the ground? Probably not. And number 3, bias being what it is, I compete with Bul Armory race guns. Their Ultimate Racer is my preferred competition pistol, and this gun shares a lot of the same features and even parts with that gun, so I have the most familiarity with this gun. That said, I'd be happy with any of the 3 guns that you have here. This is a shades of gray type difference, but I'm also not going to pick a winner. I'm just going to show you what all the differences are. And final point before we get started, just because one company does something and says that's the reason they do it doesn't make it universally true. And a good example of that is the Bul Armory Tac is made in Israel by basically everyone for the company has worked in the Israeli Defense Force, most of which are combat veterans. They pick the specs on their guns because they've actually served in combat, and they're informed by their exposure in the competitive shooting games. That said, Staccato is made in Georgetown, Texas, just north of Austin, and they have a bunch of veterans and a bunch of former police officers. Staccato is what used to be STI. They basically popularized in the United States this type of gun for competitive shooting. Staccato says one thing and Bul may say another, and that's okay. It's going to come down to what you think you want for your pistol, so there it is. So jumping right in, we'll get price right out of the way, and this is a diminishing returns kind of thing, whereas the bar used to be about $1,900, with the Bul Armory being the most affordable way to get into a double stack, 1911s, 2011 if you want to call it that, MSRP of $1,860 American dollars. This used to be the standard until the Springer came out. The Springer is selling for an MSRP of $1,499, but I've seen prices listed closer to $1,300, which has pulled the price way down. The Staccato is the highest end pistol of the bunch as far as price tag is concerned, and this version, which is the iron-sighted version of the Staccato P, is about $2,200 American dollars, and the optic ready version is about $200 more than that, plus a $160 optic plate that you have to buy that is not included with the gun. All 3 of these are basically commander length guns. They all have basically the same weight, with the Springer being the heaviest and the Bul being the lightest. It's worth noting that the Staccato is actually a 4.4 inch gun as opposed to 4.25 inch barrel, but the barrels between the Bul and the Staccato are very, very similar in length, as the Bul barrel actually extends beyond the edge of the slide. So jumping in, let's talk about the accessories that come with the pistol, and it basically tracks according to price. The Springer is going to come in a range bag with 2 magazines, a 17 and a 20 round magazine. The bag is about as minimalist as it could get, and it's not all that awesome. Moving on to the Bul Armory bag, it comes with 2 19 round magazines. Now it's worth noting that these guns all share holsters. If you have a holster that's good for the Bul, it probably takes the Staccato and it probably takes the Springer. The Springer and the Staccato can actually share magazines. The Bul has special snowflake magazines that only work for it. They're the old para body magazines, close to, not quite the same, but close to, but they have different geometry, and as a result of their differing geometry, they can have more rounds in the mag tubes. To that point, the mags that come with the Bul are almost the same length. They're slightly longer in one dimension than the other magazines, but they fit 2 more rounds. What would be a 17 round magazine in the Bul is actually 19 rounds. More interesting than that is Bul just announced a partnership with Mechgar where they take that same dimension magazine and it now fits 20 rounds. So the 20 rounder for the Bul 425 is going to sell for $60. It's made by Mechgar, has an aluminum easy off base pad, and the magazines cost the same as the Springers, so that's kind of interesting. Moving up, the range bag for the Staccato is much, much nicer. I mean, your wife could carry this into public as like a purse, maybe. Okay, it's not that kind of nice, but it is a significantly nicer range bag than what the other ones are. It comes with 2 17 round magazines and a 20 round magazine, so you get 1 extra magazine versus the other 2. The bag is like legitimately very, very nice. Like it's a solid bag. All right, moving on, let's talk about grip modules. So first and foremost, the Bul Armory and the Staccato both come with an aluminum magwell found at the bottom of the gun. It makes reloads easier, but more importantly it's a sacrificial piece. So if you're gonna beat up your nice gun for practicing reloads and stuff like that, it gives a metal area that you can jam it into and not tear up the grip frame on your gun. The Springer, on the other hand, does not come with a magwell, which means if you practice a bunch of reloads and miss, you're going to chew up the bottom of your grip, which is not good. So I would recommend finding a aluminum magwell to fit this grip. But let's talk about the grip texture. First and foremost, it is very easy to say that Springer went after Staccato with both the shape, the geometry of their guns are very, very similar with how the thing is set up, but the grip texture on the Springer is much more aggressive. This is the Hellcat type grip texture. It has a single finger groove with relief up under the trigger guard. It has a double undercut, but the double undercut is basically the same as the Staccato. It's not quite as good as what's on the Bul, but the grip texture on this is amazing. The harder you grip it, the harder it grips you back. So if you're putting a good squeeze on this, the gun is absolutely planted. Whereas the grip texture on the Staccato looks like these little lines from their Staccato like Star for the 2011, which is cool. However, it doesn't grip very hard. Like even putting a really strong squeeze on this thing, it's slippery. It's not bad, like it's not slick, but I would say it's maybe a medium finish. I've heard that there is another grip module that they offer that is significantly more aggressive. That would probably be what I would be into if I ordered one. That said, the Staccato grip also has a single finger groove and has good relief up under the trigger guard, possibly a little bit better than the Springer, but more importantly, that single finger groove allows you to twist the gun in your grip and get onto the mag release. And finishing up with the Bul is superior in my opinion in this segment because it has a very, very aggressive front strap and a very, very aggressive mainspring housing. So when you put a good front to back squeeze on the gun, which is how you're supposed to grip these guns if you care about performance, it bites you back in a way that the other two guns just doesn't. But on the side panel, they have a fissured aggressive texture, which is actually a little abrasive to touch, but when you actually put a grip on it, it is going to plant your palm on the gun and help you control recoil, which you're going to need because it is the lightest of the gun, so it's a little bit jumpier, but it stays planted in your hand better. We'll get into more of that when we get to the shooting bit, but it's worth noting. While we are on the topic of grips, this is the one area where the Staccato and the Bul are going to pull away from the Springer. This is possibly the most important thing about actually carrying one of these guns, and that is the fit on the sides between the grip safety and the frames. It's very, very tight on the Bul, very, very tight to where sand and stuff cannot get in there. Israel has a lot of sand, so they took it very seriously. Staccato similarly has amazing fit on either side of the grip safety so that no foreign debris will get in there and prevent the grip safety from being actuated. The Springer, the grip safety is, I mean, it's very loose. You can hear that noise, and there's a fairly large gap that could absolutely accept grains of sand. How real of a threat is that? Well, back in the day, believe it or not, I was a hipster and tried to carry 1911s. Playing football with the boys one day, throwing a ball around, I made a diving catch into a pile of sand. Later in the day when I was taking my gun off, I noticed there was sand all over it. So, you know, I got all the sand off. I took the gun apart to make sure there was no sand in it, and the grip safety had bound into the grip. I had to basically take the grip panels off and take the mainspring housing out to get the sand out so that the grip safety was operational. That was on a Smith & Wesson E-Series 1911. So it's a real concern, and if you're serious about actually carrying the gun, it's something you should think about. Moving on from the grip safety, let's get to the manual safety. They all have ambi safeties, and they are all actionable from the left-handed wrong hand side of the gun. So left-handed people can pretend like no one cares about you left-handed, but just go. Yes, you can get on the safety on either side of the pistol. The Staccato has a more narrow type of grip safety, which is good because it gets out of the way of your hand in the off position, and you're less likely to accidentally put the grip safety on. That's kind of how the Staccato was set up. On the other side of the aisle is the Bul Armory grip safety, which is the largest of the three, but their approach to the grip safety, and it has just as positive a snick as does the Staccato, but they want a paddle that you can activate and put the gun into service with. Bul, and I agree with them, believes that your thumb rides on the grip safety, so having the paddle there gives you something to bear down on, and that's how I like to honestly shoot 1911, 2011 pistols. But the grip safety on the Springer is a very similar profile to that of the Staccato, but it's also a MIM part, metal injection molded, so it's just, you can hear the snick is nowhere near as positive, and I have got a little bit of play when the safety is deactivated on this 4 1/4 version. And before we get off the frames of the gun, it's worth noting that the slide stop on the Springer is countersunk into the frame and is basically flush, which is a nice fit. The Bul is also countersunk into the frame, which is basically flush, which is also nice. And for some reason, I don't understand it, but the Staccato is not flush with the side of the frame. It just seems like an odd choice to make, but they didn't do it, so just worth pointing out. Moving on to the triggers. So this is where we talked in the beginning about what makes a gun a duty rated gun. This is the first thing we're going to kind of get at. So we'll go with kind of worst to first. And the Springer has the worst trigger of the bunch, and that's not to say it's a bad trigger. It's not. The difference between this trigger and the other two guns, well, at least one of them, is you can't even really tell when you're on the range. You wouldn't be able to notice. Because this has MIM parts, with the hammerback safety off, if I put my trigger onto the wall, very little bit of light take up, there's a tiny little bit of mush after I get on the wall before it's ended. The over travel is very, very short once the trigger breaks. Very, very good. Reset is also quite good. So it's a very shootable trigger. It's very easy to manage. It's a very precise trigger despite having MIM parts in it. The trigger is about 4.5 pounds. It is a medium curved profile, which is my favorite profile, and the face of the trigger is serrated, which provides excellent feedback when you're going onto the trigger. Moving on to the Staccato. The Staccato similarly has a polymer trigger shoe that has kind of ridges on it that makes it very noticeable to be able to get feedback off of. It's similarly weighted about 4.5 pounds on this gun, but there's a little bit of take up to get to the wall. You apply pressure and then you break, and just a tiny little bit of over travel. It's a little bit more exaggerated than the other two guns, this much exaggerated, and because I believe they have it set up for duty in mind. The reason you do that is so that you don't accidentally bump fire the gun if you're shooting with one hand on the gun, which is common. If somebody shoots a gun with their left hand and they're not used to single action gun, sometimes they can double. And so by having a little bit more over travel, that prevents doubling. And finishing with the Bul Armory, the trigger on this is a medium curve. It is an aluminum shoe this time with a modular bit that swaps out. So if you back out the over travel stop, you can actually push out the bit you put your finger on and pull from one side. You can swap out the length of pull without taking the gun all the way apart, which is a nice feature. The face of the aluminum shoe is grooved, similar to it. It provides feedback as well as the other two guns. The take up is similar similarly, very, very short. You put 2.5 pounds of pressure this time and they send it. And the over travel is pretty short. Now, is 2.5 pounds the right pull of trigger? A lot of people would call that a crutch, saying you should learn how to shoot heavier triggers. And I would actually argue the opposite. Like, the whole platform is a master's platform. You have to learn how to defeat a grip safety, how to grip a gun, how to lock out your wrist, and you have to develop the dexterity in your trigger finger to be able to feel the face of the trigger. By shooting lighter weight triggers, and my race gun has a 1.5 pound trigger, is you learn to load up the trigger to the wall. You develop that sensitivity in your trigger finger with a lighter weight trigger. You can put it onto any gun that you shoot where you're not over pulling the trigger and dropping shots low. If you've got an issue dropping shots low, it's likely your grip deficiency and you're over pulling the trigger. Shooting with light triggers can actually train you out of that till you have a better trigger pull, but it does take effort. You can't just buy the lighter trigger and all of a sudden develop it. You're gonna have to practice. Moving up to the slide and frame fit on the guns and the slide designs, we'll talk about the Springer. It is the least expensive option. As mentioned in my other video, there's a slight hitch when it crosses the disconnector on the gun, which is at the back of the gun. Watch the other video, you'll see what I mean. But the actual fit of the slide, very, very good. Fit of the barrel in this instance is pretty good as well. No issues feeding, well, that's not true. I've had 2 malfunctions shooting this. We'll cover them both later, but generally speaking, north of 500 rounds on the pistol with 8 different types of ammo, no problems, except for we'll talk about in a bit. Slide design, very, very basic. Standard 1911 design with forward and rear cocking serrations with the agency optics system. The AOS system is super robust. It has basically a dovetail hook at the back of the slide and is fit very tightly at the front of the slide, so it relieves stress on the screws. It doesn't sink the optic down quite as low as the other options, but it's still very, very good. Has co-witness sights, in this case a green fiber front, which some people will hate. I don't happen to mind. I don't even notice the green front. It has the heaviest profile bull barrel of the bunch, which contributes to its generally porkier weight, but at the same time, it's super duper accurate as well. I didn't even bother comparing the accuracy between these guns, guys, because they're all more accurate than I am, to the point where I was like, this is a waste of time and ammo. Moving on to the Staccato. The Staccato has Browning relief cuts at the front of the frame, which is really nice for manipulating the slide for like press checks and things like that. It also helps in holstering in low light situations. Very, very nice. The finish on the Staccato is significantly higher quality than the finish on the Springer, which is Cerakote. Similarly, that DLC finish that is on this piece is also on the hammer, it's also on the safety, it's on the slide stop. All of the pieces are coated with this DLC coating. The bull barrel tapers back toward the chamber in a way that the Springer doesn't, but at the same time, it's just generally nice. It has a flat top slide design, but the machining is very well done on this gun. The optics plates you see on the screen, they use a plate secured with 2 screws. There is a male-female relationship between the bottom of the plate and the top of the slide, and it's held in place with 2 screws, sinks the dot down nice and low. But you have to buy those plates up for an extra $160 over the cost of the gun. The Springer plates are only gonna be $60 when they come out. They're still not out yet. The Bul comes with an RMR plate right out of the box. But what's interesting about the Bul's optic plate is that it has 4 screws securing it on top of the male-female relationship between the top of the slide and the bottom of the plate, and the pocket for the gun is very tightly machined. But the 4 screws, there are 2 longer screws that go in the left side of the slide and 2 shorter screws that go in the right side over the extractor channel. So the plate is not going to walk loose. There is a bunch of screws holding the plate down. The optic is sunk nice and low to the point where the RMR is nearly on the top of the slide. So the co-witness irons that you see here are very, very short as far as those go. That said, the finish on the slide is pretty nice. I think it's a PVD finish. I'm sorry, I'll put whatever it is on the screen. But that finish is not on the manual safety. As a result, this gun has been shot plenty, so you can see where the manual safety's finish is rubbing off, and I have on really, really sweaty days had to wipe off little superficial bits of rust on the safety. But the co-witness irons, the iron sight is a Glock cut. It's in the back of the slide, so it is not on the slide plate, where the other 2, the co-witness sight is on the sight plate, so it potentially is more robust. I don't know. There's one more thing I want to talk about that I forgot to mention in the slide designs. The Bul is the only one that has the cuts at the top of the slide. You can see them right here. So Staccato doesn't have any cuts, and that's probably, I'm assuming their reasoning for that is they don't want any debris making it into the gun and potentially slowing down slide speed to promote reliability, which makes sense and I understand. However, Bul, which is in a desert country, did put the slide cuts in, and the reasoning for doing so is that you can oil the locking lugs with the slide locked back. So you can almost completely oil the pistol without having to take it apart, which is honestly, for a carry gun, really nice to have, because if you get honest about it, especially in a concealed carry context, the pistol is going to have the oil run out or evaporate on it, and honestly, lubrication is important to keeping slide speed. So if you're maintaining the gun, the Bul's ports on the top are quite nice. Real quickly, moving on, before we talk about shooting these guns, let's talk about how they balance. So both the Bul and the Staccato are very similar in weight, despite this one being a little bit longer. The balance of both these guns is roughly similar, with the Staccato being slightly longer, having more weight out toward the muzzle. It kind of makes it want to be a little bit more muzzle heavy, but both of these guns with magazines in them are very well balanced, which is good because when you mount a weapon mounted light on it, it's not going to be hideously nose heavy. That said, there is an optimum weight for a 9mm gun, in my opinion, and it's about 40 ounces. The Springer with the heavier profile slide and the super heavy barrel is closer to that weight than the other ones, but it comes with a cost because it is ridiculously muzzle heavy, made worse by putting a weapon mounted light on it. Oh, did I say weapon mounted light? I meant frame weight. That's right, a lot of the Go Fast Cool kids have weapon mounted lights because they make the guns recoil less. And about 1,000 of you are gonna spin up in the comments like, oh, it's for positive target ID. And that's why you put weapon mounted lights on all of your range toys as well, you know, just in case, right? Right? Also works as a light. So shooting these guns without weapon mounted lights, the recoil is very similar. The guns are jumpier than is the Springer, but because of the excellent grip texture on the Bul, it's very easy to return to zero. I didn't have as much of an issue with this, but it would punish a bad grip on the gun a little bit worse than the Bul would. And this is gonna come across as controversial, and this is where you guys are gonna fire up the whole like, he's being a shill thing. And I bought this gun, guys, they didn't send it to me. This gun is probably the one with the characteristics of how heavy the barrel is, how heavy the slide is, whatever spring is in the recoil system. This is the gun that most of you wanna shoot. Unless you're doing a lot of training and have a super rock solid grip and return the gun to zero very well, and you're waiting on the dot to come back down to fire again for most shots, this gun is going to be the easiest for most people to shoot because the recoil impulse feels slower, the dot lift feels more gentle, it feels more predictable. It's a lot of fun to shoot. This would be the one that I would put in my wife's hands and say, this is what a 9mm is like, honey. So for a range toy, the Springer would actually be the one that I would recommend. It's possibly the most pleasant to shoot, but it's the heaviest. If you were to actually put it in a holster and carry it all day, either one of these is going to be more pleasant for it. I've been carrying the Springer for the past week. I mean, it's not wildly different, but it is noticeable. And finally, we're gonna talk about guide rods. And that sounds like something stupid to be talking about, but Staccato got this the most right because they use the Dawson Precision toolless guide rod. What that means is you push the button down on the bottom of the guide rod and the guide rod lifts right out of the assembly, which is really nice. Next best is the Bul Armory design. Bul Armory actually uses those toolless guide rods in their race guns. It's what's in my Ultimate Racer. They use a one-piece guide rod, which what that means is I lock the slide to the rear, I have to get a staple or a paper clip and put it into a little hole in the side of the guide rod. I take the gun apart like any other 1911, and then I can pull the guide rod out with the spring captured with my staple or my paper clip. And then finally, in a far distant third is the two-piece guide rod that the Springer has. The Springer requires a hex wrench to take apart. So what you do is you lock it to the rear, there is a opening in the front of the guide rod, unscrew that bad boy, and you can then take the gun apart like you would, then unscrew it the rest of the way, and the spring comes off, and that's the way it goes. Not my favorite design, and that is the first malfunction that I had with the Springer. I did not tighten the two-piece guide rod enough. It walked its way loose, and it caused the gun not to go into battery when I was chronoing with it. That's the first and only malfunction I had until we get into the chrono for these three guns. So when chronoing these three guns, I chronoed the Remington range ammo as well as some duty loads, which is the Sig Sauer V-Crown 124 standard pressure defensive load. All the Remington taught me about these guns is that the Remington ammo is really inconsistent because the velocities were all over the map. With the SIG, the ammo was all basically the same speed, but what it did show me is the SIG 124 hollow points are very short due to the projectile shape that they use. The Prodigy didn't want to feed them.
Doesn't like this ammo.
The first one went in kind of, and then it just didn't seem to want to feed. So I fired one round and then had to kind of fix it, and then it would fire the other 4.
It won't feed. 11-16.
The Staccato was not above hating the SIG ammo either, because it made one of the rounds pop out of the chamber and get caught like a stovepipe like that.
Staccato doesn't like the SIG 124s either.
That was truly unique. It was using the Staccato mags and everything. It didn't like those rounds either. Generally speaking, because this gun is based off the 1911 design, so the 45 ACP is the cartridge it was designed around. Longer ammo fares better in these guns, and the SIG ammo apparently is just too short, except for the Bul Armory, which honestly, I carry the thing with SIG V-crowns because they just happen to be in stock everywhere throughout the ammo crunch. Bul Armory does not care about the projectiles. It eats pretty much anything. So where does that leave us? Boys, this is a diminishing returns curve. I will say, having spent some time with the Staccato P, that I will be picking one up to keep in the safe. I really like the P. It's made here in Texas, and I'm, into that. So I will be picking one up eventually because it's kind of the standard that all the duty grade 2011s are based around. It is the namesake 2011. The Bul is a gun that I carry with me every day. I don't feel bad about this thing in any way. It compares very, very favorably to the Staccato. In fact, I would say that it's basically the same spec. It's just a different spin on how all those things are going. Some would argue, if you like what they did, that it's better, and some would argue that what the Staccato did is better. I like the fact that it's lighter weight because it makes it easier to carry. But really, this gun is significant because it is so darn easy to shoot, and people who buy this kind of gun, I don't think for the most part are looking for that concealed carry type gun. A lot of people probably will concealed carry it, but as far as an actual recreational type gun, or potentially even a home defense gun, because this gun is so darn easy to shoot, I think a lot of people are going to get into these things. I think that Springfield has a success on their hands with how they put these things together. Whatever teething issues they have with the new release, I suspect will get ironed out in the next batch of production. Regardless of where you land on that and what your needs are, I think you really can't go wrong with any of the 3. Remember, 5,000 likes in the first 24 hours gets you a comparison between the 5-inch guns and the 4-inch guns. There you have it. If you've got comments, sound off, and I'll see what I can do. I appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.